This Vilva and me together in Elvas from the imaging office, and I'm from the EKI stroke lab. We together organized the symposium because we both think it's relevant. So now I've also introduced you and the imaging office. And now I'm going to introduce the second speaker. That's Vincent van der Meer from MDProject. He's not from Erasmus MC, he's from external, so he will share his thoughts and ideas on looking on this topic from outside Erasmus MC. And he's senior consultant with MDProject on the regulatory and legal aspects of medical software development. Yeah.
1 second, and I'll share the screen. Okay, hopefully it should work now. Okay? Yes.
You're sharing. Good.
Thanks.
Okay. See. Thank you very much for inviting me to this symposium. I was already introduced. I'm a consultant at MDProject. It's a small Dutch company. We're about 10, 12 people. And we help mainly companies, commercial companies, to bring their medical intentions to the market. Sometimes it's a spin-off from an academic university. So, for example, I work in a project which is actually a spin-off of the Erasmus MC. They built a thermal therapy device. It was used in-house, or it is used in-house, but they're not trying to put it on the market as well. I have a history I have a degree in molecular biology, but a history in software and web development. So, for me, MDR, medical devices, and software, it's an ideal combination. First off, a little bit of a disclaimer. The information in this training, these are actually a few slides from a 2-day training that I usually give. I have to be very picky on what slides I had to take to condense it, but it's based on current legislation, current version of standards, because, the MDR is not new legislation, but legislation can change. There is actually an amendment being published right now. Standards change as well. And it also contains my interpretation of, in my experience and opinions of legislation and standards. So that's my disclaimer. Why is there the MDR? Well, these are just a few examples. I'm sorry, they are in Dutch, but they are from news websites about health apps. Don't blindly trust health apps. How trustworthy are they? They miss guidelines. It even goes on. It already said there should be one European standard. We need some kind of certification mark for medical apps. I can go on and on about these over the past few years. So there was a need for legislation standards for medical software and apps. Software is not actually new since the MDR. Before the MDR, there was the MDD, the Medical Device Directive. I'll explain the difference in a little bit. That was published in 1993, but in 2007, software was added to this definition of a medical device. I'm not going to explain a lot about the definition, but it's not new since the MDR. But suddenly there was a lot more focus on software because there was this idea of upclassification. In the MDD, in the old directive, everything was class 1, which is a low-risk medical device, except something. With the MDR, it's a little bit the other way around. It's probably class 2A or 2B, and there are only a few examples of class 1 medical devices. There are some differentiating opinions about that. But how does this work? MDD, MDR, CE marking. You probably know this image. This is Europe, European Union. We blanked out the UK already because of Brexit. They don't have MDR. They don't have CE marking anymore. But legislation, the MDD, the MDR, they are all for the whole European economic area, not just Europe as a continent or European Union, European economic area. And I said before, there's a directive, Medical Device Directive and Medical Device Regulation. A directive, it was actually, I think it was called a richtlijn in the Netherlands. there is a certain goal that we want to achieve in Europe, and every country has its own rules to achieve that goal. But with a regulation, it becomes law immediately across those different member states. So it's immediately enforceable. But both those directives and regulations, they are for CE marking, Conformity European, some kind of French abbreviation. And MDR and MDD, they are not the only CE marking regulations. Even for kids' toys or fireworks or some containers, machines, basically electromagnetic safety, they are all CE marking directives and regulations, and they have the same principle. It's a product safety regulation or product safety law, and it says if you want to place a product that is subject to this legislation, it needs to comply with this, this, and this. And they are all talking about Annex 1, which used to be essential requirements, and now they are called general safety and performance requirements. Then there's a link with standards. One was mentioned already, ISO 14971 for risk management. How does that work? This is written in law. Devices that are in conformity with relevant harmonized standards have the presumption of conformity with the relevant GSPRs. So a harmonized standard contains another annex saying, well, this part of the standard actually relates to GSPR 17, for example, for medical device. Or GSPR 2, 3, 4, or 5 for risk management. So that's why harmonized standards and international standards come into play with medical devices. How does the markttoezicht, the market application, thank you. How does that work? We have European law, and then we have member states, and each member state has a competent authority. And if you have a medium or high risk medical device, class 2A, 2B, or 3, then oversight is basically subcontracted to a notified body. They are entities, they are notified, you can call them designated, but they are notified by a group of competent authorities saying this entity can pre-marketly approve medical devices. And for class 1 and also for in-house developed medical devices, it's the competent authority who directly oversees it. But they do it not upfront. You don't have some kind of pre-market approval. It's based on sampling, really. They have a risk-based approach as well. A few years ago, they had a focus on software. They do a risk-based approach of overseeing the market. Very basic, Article 5, placing on a market and putting it into service. Device being placed on the market, put in service, if it applies or if it complies with this regulation. Well, it's quite a bit of a duh rule, but this is actually what's needed to make sure that companies comply with it. And if you look a bit further into Article 5, it says, well, with the exception of a few things, if you manufacture and use it only within health institutions, nothing of the MDR has to be complied with, except for, and it comes the whole list of rules that you already mentioned. This is very short. They're not transferred to another legal entity, so you cannot sell them, even not to other academic centers. They have to be designed and manufactured under a quality management system. Well, you have one. Only if target patient group specific needs cannot be met. There has to be some kind of public declaration that the institution is aware that they made this according to Article 5.5. Have to draw up documentation on manufacturing processes, on meeting GSPRs, and they have to say something about experience gained from clinical use. All in all, this is about half a page if you look at the MDR, while for legal manufacturers, so commercial legal manufacturers, they have 3 pages of rules that apply to them, but very specifically, this is what the QMS needs to contain. So it's already quite a bit easier for health institutions if they do it in-house. Yeah, I'm good on time. Common pitfalls that I see is about the qualification and classification, which I'm going to talk about in the next few slides. Not taking into account the general safety and performance requirements in an early stage. That's quite important, otherwise you have to do a lot of rework. There is a lot of creative interpretation of regulatory requirements. I know I work mostly for commercial companies, so they have to do it according to the MDR, and they have their own interpretation of clinical evaluation, for example. And they do what is minimally required, or they say, yeah, we have some information security QMS. No, it's a QMS, right? We can do it under that QMS, but it's really different to have a quality management system that's focused on product development. Okay. Luckily, for qualification and classification of medical device software, which is just a tiny subset of medical devices overall, there's MDCG guidance document 2019-11 has a very helpful, testable decision tree on whether it is actually a medical device or not. If it's not, it's probably still health software, but it's not subject to the MDR. First off is the product software. Don't need to explain to it, but otherwise don't look at this guidance. Is it a device without a medical intended purpose? I'm not going into detail on that. Is it an accessory for a medical device, or is it driving or influencing the use of a medical device? Well, if yes, then immediately you can say it has to comply with the MDR. If not, there are a few other questions that need to be answered with yes. So one, does the software perform an action on the data? I can give one example. An electronic health record, in principle, doesn't do an action on the data. It just stores and archives the data. So an electronic health record by itself is not a medical device. It is health software, and it can contain modules that are medical devices, but in essence, it's not a medical device. Is the action that it does for the benefit of an individual patient? If not, not a medical device. So if it's for for planning purposes, well, then it's not a medical device. But if it's just accumulating data and saying something about certain groups or epidemiological reasons, not a medical device. And then there's a question, does the software comply with the definition of medical device software? And this is definition that's only provided in this guidance. It basically says if the software is used according to one of the medical intended purposes in the definition of medical device, so the whole list that was shown, then yes, it is medical device software. So, a few examples. An ECG holder, I know this is hardware as well, but it does contain software. To record ECG data, which can be exported and evaluated by clinical analysts to reach a diagnosis. Is it a medical device? Raise your hand if you want to say no. Is there medical device software? Probably, if it can be exported, you can say, yes, these are analog signals, but they are exported from this device. So there's some kind of software in this medical device. Another example, a running app. I don't know if you know Runkeeper, most people do. Intended purpose, just to display heart rate, speed, time of a runner. Is it a medical device? Yeah. Yeah, is displaying the heart rate of a runner a medical purpose? Yes, that's true, but that's not part of this intended purpose. So actually, no, there is a preamble in the MDR, which is like the MDR has preambles, like introducing paragraphs on why is there the MDR. Then there are a lot of articles, and then there are all the annexes. But the preambles already exclude software being used for general well-being and lifestyle purposes. They are not medical devices. So if they are just for promoting a healthy life, not a medical device. If you would say, if you use this Runkeeper app and it reduces your chance on diabetes, then you're a medical device. Then it has a different preventive medical purpose. I go back a little bit to the previous example. ECG holder to record ECG data that is used to automatically diagnose patients. Medical device. Does it contain software? Definitely. So it's still a medical device, but it's a higher risk class. If it doesn't diagnose by itself, probably class 3 or 2B. It depends. In the same MDCG guidance document, it explains a little bit. It excludes class 1 medical devices, unfortunately, but it basically has these two axes, the significance of information. Is it very significant? I heard a Teams beep. Do I need to? Okay. It's very important. It's probably a higher class. And the situation of the patient is also important. It's very non-serious, then probably just to class 2A, etc. This is based on more international guidance from the IMDRF. It's one of the International Medical Device Regulators Forum. They are even bigger than Europe, but Europe says, okay, there's these categories. In our legislation, we map that to these 4 or 3 classes. Right. Go back to Article 5 a little bit. Device shall meet the GSPRs. Okay. And then in Article 5.5 it says nothing applies from the MDR except this, and the GSPRs apply. So I'm going to skip that a little bit. Basically the chapters of the GSPRs that were already explained, including the GSPR checklist, which was already explained. But basically, yeah, this is where the standards come in, right? Risk management according to ISO 14971. Medical device software, there's a different standard, the 62304, and you provide evidence that you have made a device according to that standard. For GSPRs, that's not applicable. And for software, a lot is not applicable. You can just write, well, it's software. We don't have a microbial state. So, great. A few very specifics. GSPR 17.2. Software shall be developed in accordance to the state of the art, taking into account principles of development lifecycle, risk management, information security, etc. That's basically why you want to apply the harmonized standard for medical device software. If you are at least planning to maybe in the future somehow put it on the market anyway. But you could ask yourself, even for an in-house developed medical device, why not apply the harmonized standard for it? Because it demonstrates that you use the state-of-the-art standards. Skip the other ones. Focus areas. Like I said, the qualification and classification, you will want to write down why it is a medical device, or if you conclude that it's not a medical device, it's actually just well-being software. It's very handy to still write it down, because down the line someone will ask you, hey, isn't this medical device software? And you'll want to say, no, we've actually looked into this, because 5 years down the road, the same question about the same product will be asked to someone else, and they will be like, oh, hey, this might be a medical device. You won't be the first person or a company who spends a lot of time investing in being compliant with the MDR and thinking it is a medical device tens of thousands of euros later, and then come to the conclusion that you're not a medical device. Very early on, decide your strategy, whether you just want to use it in-house, if that is your sole purpose, or if you think there's the slightest chance that you want to maybe go to the market because of the valorization stuff. Prepare appropriately. Use the appropriate documentation, because, well, I don't have to say it again, you have to do a lot of rework. So it comes down to at least basic requirement management and risk management. I'm okay in time, I think, to list a few slides. This is the V model. Not sure if people are familiar with it. Basically a different setup of the image on the user needs and verification and validation. That was an image from the FDA. This is a simplified version of the V model that's also found in standards. You define your use requirements. From there, you can define system requirements, software requirements. You're going to actually develop it. You verify the detailed software requirements, and you validate the more general user requirements. And this is actually an example of where standards overlap. The 62304 for medical device software just talks about system and software requirements and the verification of it, but it doesn't say anything about validation. When I go to a company and I help them in their design and development process, this is actually the example of the Erasmus MC spin-off, which also contains hardware. In the development plan, I include a copy of the V model saying, okay, for anyone who's going to be involved in this development process, they should get an idea about the hierarchy of these requirements. We have the user requirements, which are very high, same with regulatory requirements. Could be that if it's just software, that you only have software requirements, or that certain risk control measures are also software requirements. If you have hardware-software combinations, then control measures can be different requirements. and what kind of verification and validation activities you expect to do. If you take a look at standards, basically how it works, the MDR says you need to have a QMS, or quality management system. ISO 13485 is a standard for quality management systems for medical devices. There's a certain clause in there for design and development, clause 7.3, and then the 82304 and 60304, they're basically a deepening of those specific clauses. And they're also specific for certain medical devices, while the ISO 13485 is for all kinds of medical devices. A lot of GSPRs have to do with risks, not just 2 to 5, but even in those risks or in the GSPRs about design and manufacturing, they all talk about risks, and risk management. So more risks. The very basic concept of product risk management, so not process risk management, but medical device product risk management, is that there are hazards, sources of harm. There's always some kind of sequence of events, gebeurtenissen, which lead to a hazardous situation. Hazardous situation, the definitions are here. This is an image from ISO 14971. I always say hazard could be fire, and a hazardous situation could be that your kitchen is on fire. So it exposes someone to a certain hazard. It doesn't mean that you get burnt immediately. It depends on whether you go in the kitchen or not. It could be that it leads to a harm, which is a burn wound. There are a lot of tools to use within risk management, but in the end, this is the basic concept about it. If you are going to apply the ISO 14971, everyone will be very happy with you, but you have to keep in mind that the ISO 14971, just like the MDR, is written with physical medical devices in the back of their heads. So a lot of the hazards, a lot of examples that are given in the ISO 14971, they are all related to physical medical devices and not so much the software. If it comes to software, it's usually in data, maybe diagnostic information, functionality. So a lot of the risk examples that are given on Google, etc., they're not relevant for here. Then you have to also be very clear on what probability means. I see a lot of risk management that is based on information security risk management, and you say, yeah, probably once per year. But what does that mean once per year for a specific device or for the organization in general? What kind of device do you have? Is it single use? Is it multi-use for a single patient, etc.? It can become very complicated, but you have to be very clear. And then all in all, your risks will be either acceptable or unacceptable, and you need to think of risk control measures. A little bit quicker to my slides. More on risk management. Now I have some English examples as well. In the last few years, doesn't have to do with the AI Act, but the last 4 years, and with AI Act a little bit more, there's a lot of focus on cybersecurity. All notified bodies, they group up as well. They have team notified body position papers. They want manufacturers and companies to think about cybersecurity for their medical devices because of all of these reasons. And you can include that in your overall product risk management, because there are risks that are just a security risk, but they are also a patient safety related risk. So if you include them, if an attacker or hacker obtains personal health information, there's no clinical harm. So, yeah, what do you want to do about it? It is a security risk. But if the attacker cannot just obtain the information, but they can also change configurations for a medical device, for example, then the cybersecurity risk also becomes safety-related risks. And then you'll be in one of these news bulletins. Okay, a little bit about requirement management. I'm happy that's already included in the quality management system here. I see this happen a lot. If you don't do your requirements management well, you're going to have a problem. Because you have all these different stakeholders, even more than that were mentioned in the previous presentation. But everyone has their own idea about a certain requirement. So you need to properly write your requirements. Otherwise, you will develop something completely different. And always like this one project was documented. That relates to the previous slides as well. Yeah. Yeah, the customer really needed. So these standards, the 82304, the 62304, they actually explain a little bit. They think about system requirements, think about software requirements, and for example, think about these. So they help you think about proper requirements that help you in development. 5 minutes. Yeah, I'm gonna a little bit more. These are just some concepts from the relevant standards. So the 62304, they say, think about your software system in general, that it comprises of different modules or components. So we call them software items, and they can consist of software units. You could compare them to specific functions, but these are all defined concepts in the 62304. They say, think about a software architecture design because it will help you in your risk control measures in defining your requirements as well. Soup, not the edible soup, but software of unknown provenance. That's also a concept that is known, but often misunderstood. Not everything is soup. I've seen soup list stuff of unknown provenances. Basically, soup is I think one example, if you take something from a public Git repository and you include it because it has a function that translates texts into data or whatever, that is soup. You're going to incorporate it into your own software. But your web hosting, if it's cloud software, external services, container images, they are not soup. They are not incorporated into your medical device. But still, these are important aspects of your device. They're actually in the GSPRs, I think in 14 or something. The interaction with the environment should be appropriately controlled. Verification and validation. Well, I think this summarizes why proper verification and validation is important, because otherwise this happens. I'm not going to explain the real difference. I think it was actually included in the first presentation. Verification is whether design output meets the design input. So did I make it according to the software requirements that I made? And validation is more, did I actually make the right product for the patient? So did I come up with the appropriate intended purpose, and does it actually achieve the intended purpose? Skip this one. This is more about proper documentation. Think of at least a traceability matrix, or use software that is able to provide you with a traceability matrix. If you want to do that, really depends on the kind of, on how much requirements that you have, how professional you want to have it, if you have appropriate resources to use requirement tools. And just to give a few, if you have developed software, you might recognize Jira, Confluence, stuff like that, to have a tool where you can store your requirements and store your risk management and your documentation. Just 2 more slides. If you do decide to go to the market, now or at a later stage, you already need to think about the conformity assessment. I mentioned the difference between class 1 medical devices and class 2 and A and higher. If it's class 1, your life is a little bit easier. The technical documentation requirements are way more strict. They're in Annex 2 and 3, actually 4 as well. And you do a very clinical evaluation is a dossier on its own, because there are very specific requirements in a separate annex, Annex 14 of the MDR. But if you have developed it within a health institution, you probably have a lot of clinical data, so your clinical evaluation should be a breeze. Like I said, we help a lot of commercial companies, early stage commercial companies, spin-offs of health institutions. If you have any questions, feel free to email us or call us. We're based in Alphen aan den Rijn, which is not that far from here. Yeah, that was it, basically. Any questions?
Thank you, Vincent.
Thank you.
Any questions for Vincent? Yes. Yeah. Or maybe it's also nice to briefly introduce yourself.
Yes, I'm from Big R here. I work, for example, on diagnosis or therapy prediction. And in example 3, you mentioned that there's a diagnosis tool installed on the holster of the ECG signal. Is there, from a legal point of view, a difference if it's installed on the device itself rather than on the computer next to the device where it needs to be exported? Does that software still fall under MDR regulations?
It depends. Is the answer to everything. It depends on is the data just exported from the holter and then all the calculations are done in the cloud? Is it a system that has to be combined together, or are there commercially available holters and you just make the software that is in the cloud? Is there a time criticality component in there? Is it used to identify cardiac arrests or just arrhythmias? Right. So there is a difference. If you take a look at the classification rule 11, that will probably say it's either class 2A or 2B or 3. So it depends on the intended purpose, but it could be a different risk classification. Thank you.
Other questions?
Yeah, thank you. This was a good overview. Do you have suggestions for verification processes? You often talk about here's the overview, and maybe it will be discussed later. But exactly to the point of how do you make software environments where you can still do research, but also ensure there's verification and validation. What standards would you recommend for this? I realize this is different at a unit level and system level, but are there any guiding documents?
The 62304 explains a lot of different types of verification testing. So from unit testing and all kinds of, undocumented testing as well. As long as you describe that you're going to do undocumented testing, then that's a very appropriate method of testing as well. But it says at least you need to do system testing. And all the other testing that is available, integration testing, unit testing, depends on the safety classification and how easy you want to make it yourself. As a policy, I would say try to include as much automated testing as possible. So at the point of writing code, also write your test cases and use automated software, because it will provide you with a lot of evidence that you have done very detailed unit testing. But yeah, that's really a choice that you make yourself. Yeah, that will be validation, I think, or user acceptance testing.
We do a lot of research on prostate cancer, and I know we have the prostate cancer predictor, but it's only on paper. So you can do on paper, you can add some figures and you can draw some lines, and then you know what risk of someone is to get a malignant prostate. Would you see that as a medical device or not? Because it's just paper filling in and some and drawing a line, and then you can see the prediction.
It's a normal code.
Yeah, it's a normal code. Yeah, exactly. Would you
If it's
and they are used to predict the risk. I mean, people make decisions based.
well, the scope of this talk is software, so I cannot answer. But if your next question would be, what if I do it? If you do it digitally, right? If you do it in a PDF, you can still consider it paper-based. But if you have to draw the line yourself, I would say then the one filling it in, it's basically a scientific model, right? Or a consensus model that you test your patient against. But if you have software that does the calculations, it takes input data and creates output data, which is a risk score, saying 99% sure this patient has prostate cancer, then it's medical device software. But if it's just on paper, and then it depends on the doctor if they can draw an appropriate line or not. No, I don't think so.
Our software is simple to do it like on palm, then we don't have to.
That's not what I said. That's not what I said. No, I can't be sure without more details.
Did you want to? Sorry.
No, yeah, we had
disagree. But the idea was what website easier for
Yeah.
So the end version was really just going to write a medical article in one of the journals, and the last appendix would be in .com.
Yeah, then it's PDF and then we themselves.
Yeah. Then it's just a scientific model.
And then the other portion-
So it really has an influence on your care.
Yeah, but there's no device.
Not actually. Yeah.
If there's a risk for the patient, it's not actually if it that does not constitute whether it qualifies as a medical device. Whether it qualifies as a medical device depends on the intended purpose defined by the manufacturer. If they say, well, this is not for diagnostic or prediction or prognosis or whatever, it's just to draw lines, then
And the argument that, well, let's make software because that's safer, and otherwise the doctor has to draw the line and he can make a mistake. It's okay, but then it's still a medical device. So it's not an argument in, like, well, if we're not doing this, this will be, the other situation will be less safe. That's not an argument. It's
correct.
Yeah. I didn't think of this, but yeah, it becomes medical device and then you're stuck to the end.
In that case, would it not be then the doctor is the medical device and risks and assessments are placed on their qualifications, their risks? No?
I wouldn't degrade doctors to be devices, but I get your point.
Have a different regulatory agency.
Yeah, it's true.
There are also regulations for traffic lights. And so people who make traffic lights have regulations. But you could argue that crossroads are less safe without the traffic lights. But then still, if you want to put a traffic light there, still traffic lights are following the regulations.
Yeah.
I'm going to steal that. There was another question here. Yeah.
For example, vision models that have been developed in online environment to calculate and give a prediction to make a clinical decision on.
Yeah.
But they were made, for example, a few years ago, 2017, 18. Do they still have to adhere to these MDR, or is it of models that are developed now?
They were put into service under the MDD, so they had to comply to the MDD. And in the MDD, there was already software included, which could be a medical device. Then if they are still class 1 under MDR, if they have no up classification, they're still for prevention, prediction, and you can rationalize that they're class 1. Then they had to comply with the MDR starting 26th of May 2021. If they're up classified under the MDR, then they still have some time left, but they had to file an application with the notified body last week. Yeah, literally.
Maybe for in-house development, maybe the MISO and PR can elaborate a bit on that from like what advices were made before this MDR became into practice and were already in practice. And what about software that's already there but not in practice yet?
Yeah, you have the formal answer and the wise answer, especially for software. Because in the MDD, a healthcare institution was mentioned. So it was focused on manufacturers. And we used this as an argument to do whatever was wanted. And now, in the medical device regulation, we are mentioned and there is a specific article about in-house development. So you could argue that you don't have to do anything in compliance to the medical device regulation. But now you know this, and you know that it's about risk management and to make sure that it's a safe product. And maybe even when you are updating it, then you have new iteration, so you have to comply to it. My advice would be make sure that this is still a device you want to use, that you think you can guarantee that it's a safe product, and if it isn't, maybe you should
Take it off.
figure out if you can make an iteration that complies with it.
Well, it's Vincent.
Other questions can be in a coffee break as well, I think.
Thanks again, Vincent. And then we continue with Jan van der Brand. He will tell us about MDR and the research process, how researchers depend on the MDR. That's what you want to hear, of course. Jan has a background in epidemiology. He's data steward at the research suite and also is connected to the data. And is an expert in developing software for in-house use in Rasmussen 3.
I know a little bit.